The first bullet did not ping. It did not whine or zip. It arrived with the percussive crack of a bullwhip, followed instantly by a sound like a giant, petrified hornet slamming into a pane of glass. It was the heavy, thuggish report of a 7.62 by 39mm round, fired from a well-used but brutally effective Kalashnikov, and it struck the armored windshield of the lead grain truck with undisguised malice. Farhad, the man gripping the wheel, convulsed as if the round had hit his own body. His knuckles, already tight on the cracked leather of the steering wheel, bleached to a bloodless white. A choked, rasping sound escaped his throat, lost in the superheated air of the cab, which already smelled of hot vinyl, old sweat, and his own rising panic. The vast, sun-blasted expanse of the Zarathian desert road, shimmering under a merciless midday sun, suddenly felt like the narrowest of traps. Beside him, Alex Kincaid remained preternaturally still. He was a man who seemed to have been carved from the very landscapes he moved through. All hard angles, sun-weathered skin, and an economy of motion that bordered on absolute stillness. His eyes, the color of washed-out slate on a winter morning, were fixed forward. But they weren't just looking. They were dissecting the terrain. He registered the small, almost insignificant puff of ochre dust kicked up from the shooter's position, a jumble of rust-colored rocks 200 yards to their right. In the vibrating side mirror, he registered the subtle but undeniable ripple of panic spreading down the line of the four-truck convoy, a wave of kinetic fear. Through the speaker of the Motorola XTS 5000 clipped to the sun visor, tuned to a frequency-hopping channel in the 462 MHz UHF band, he heard the frantic, garbled shouting of another driver. But most critically, he registered the fine, high-frequency tremor in Farhad's hands. "Easy, Farhad," Alex said. His voice was a low baritone, calm and steady as a ship's anchor in a deep harbor. It was a voice engineered in the soundproofed rooms of Langley and field-tested in the forgotten hellholes of the world. It was a tool, a precision instrument, and its specific purpose in that moment was to keep Farhad's foot from either stomping the brake or flooring the accelerator. "Maintain your speed, exactly as it is. Do not deviate." "They are shooting at us," Farhad stated, the words a redundant testament to his terror. He was a former schoolteacher from the besieged city of Al-Ma'ar, a man who had once passionately debated the nuances of Sufi poetry, and was now a critical, if unwitting component in a multi-million-dollar covert operation. His qualification for this suicide run was tragically simple. He looked the part of a simple truck driver, and he hated the murderous regime of President al-Hamal, with a fury that burned hot enough to overcome his instinct for self-preservation. He knew a slow, agonizing death awaited him in the dungeons of the Mukhabarat, the state's secret police, should they be caught. "They are testing us," Alex corrected him, his eyes still methodically scanning the landscape, logging every shadow, every potential firing position. "They want to see if we panic. A real grain convoy, worried about common bandits, might speed up, or stop and try to surrender. We, however, are a humanitarian mission under the pristine banner of the World Food Initiative. We are supposed to feel protected by our neutrality. So, we will act like it. We will be insulted, not afraid. Hold your speed." This was the lie. It was a beautiful, multifaceted, meticulously crafted lie, sanctioned at the highest levels of the United States government. The four lumbering 10-ton Renault Carax trucks, painted a pristine, hopeful white with the blue WFI logo stenciled on their sides, were indeed carrying grain, thousands upon thousands of pounds of it. But buried in the very soul of Farhad's lead truck, woven into its steel skeleton like a terminal cancer, was the truth. The real cargo. 120 disassembled FIM-92 Stinger missile systems, man-portable air defense systems, man-pads, the tools, the equalizers, that would allow the beleaguered Free Zarathian army to begin swatting Al-Hamal's Russian-made Mi-24 Hind gunships out of the sky. To the rebels, these missiles were salvation delivered. To the regime, they were an existential threat. To Alex Kincaid, they were simply the payload. The operation, codenamed Manna from Heaven, was a masterclass in audacity and deception. For 6 months, a team from the CIA's Special Activities Division had worked through a shell corporation in Marseille to acquire 4 used commercial trucks. They were driven to a nondescript warehouse in southern Turkey where they were stripped down to their bare frames. The real work, the art, was in the modification. The standard hollow cross members of the chassis were painstakingly replaced with custom-milled high-tensile steel tubes. Their internal diameter, a perfect match for the Stinger's launch tube assembly. The grip stocks and the BCU units, the battery coolant units and sensitive guidance systems, were packed into 5-kilo bricks, vacuum-sealed in mylar, and then encased in a dense granular polymer that had been chemically engineered to mimic the exact radio opacity and thermal signature of milled flour. These bricks were then secreted inside specially marked grain sacks, visually indistinguishable from the thousands of others filling the cargo beds. The crowning achievement of the concealment, the detail Alex knew was their ace in the hole, was the truck's fuel tanks. The 2 massive, 150-gallon diesel tanks flanking the cab were ingenious fakes. The outer shell was standard aluminum, but inside they contained a smaller, baffled fuel bladder with a 40-gallon capacity. More than enough for the journey, but a fraction of the norm. The remaining space, a carefully shielded and insulated cavity, held the missile batteries and the most sensitive targeting acquisition components. Any inspector who dipped the tank would find diesel. Any inspector who knocked on it would hear the solid thud of a full tank. Only a full-spectrum ultrasonic scan or a high-powered X-ray might find the anomaly. And the odds of encountering that level of technology at a dusty desert checkpoint were, according to Langley's analysts, 3.7%. Alex's job was to be the countermeasure for that 3.7%. Another shot rang out, closer this time. A heavy slug punched a neat, circular hole through the canvas flap covering the cargo bed of the 3rd truck. Alex heard the yelp of its driver, a man named Omar, over the radio, a spike of static and fear. "Stay in line, Omar," Alex commanded, his thumb pressing the transmit button on the disguised radio unit. "They are just boys with guns, trying to scare us for money or for sport. Ignore them. We are ghosts." He was lying again. These weren't bandits. Bandits hit fast and hard, a flurry of violence aimed at the engine block or the tires to disable the vehicles and seize the cargo. This was a probe, a delicate, deliberate test. And Alex had a sinking feeling, a cold pit in his stomach, that he knew who was behind it. Colonel Sorin of the Mukhabarat, a man whose reputation for cruel, methodical intelligence work was whispered in fear from the capital to the smallest border village. Sorin was no brute. He was a chess player, and this felt exactly like one of his measured, probing opening gambits. The shooting stopped as abruptly as it had begun. The convoy continued its slow, grinding progress through the oppressive, shimmering heat. The silence in the cab was now somehow louder, more menacing than the gunfire had been. Farhad was breathing again, but it was shallow and rapid, the panting of a cornered animal. "They are gone?" he asked, his voice a dry whisper. "For now," Alex said. He unclipped his satellite phone. To a casual observer, it was a battered 10-year-old Nokia, a relic. In reality, it was a heavily modified burst transmission device that could upload its encrypted data packet to a passing KH-12 reconnaissance satellite in 1.2 seconds. He typed a quick, coded message with his thumb. Probe East Pass. Continuing. Kincaid. He didn't expect a reply. His handler, a man named Marcus, sequestered in a windowless, climate-controlled room in Virginia, would see the message. He was Alex's eye in the sky, his guardian angel, his ghost. Marcus had been the one to brief him 3 weeks ago in a sterile safe house in Incirlik, the air outside thrumming with the constant, low-frequency drone of C-17 Globemasters. The briefing room smelled of industrial bleach, stale coffee, and quiet desperation. A large, high-resolution satellite map of Zarathos covered one entire wall. "This is the route," Marcus had said, his finger tracing a thin red line. It snaked from the Turkish border, south through the relatively stable Kurdish-controlled territories, and then took a sharp, dangerous turn east, into the contested heartland of the country. The final destination was a series of caves in the Jebel Akhdar Mountains, the last major stronghold of the FZD. You'll have 4 trucks. 3 are clean. 1 is the payload vehicle. The drivers are local assets, vetted by our station in Erbil. They believe they are smuggling high-value medical supplies. Only the lead driver, Farhad, knows the stakes are higher. He doesn't know what the cargo is, specifically, just that it's military hardware for the resistance. Plausible deniability for everyone. "Checkpoints?" Alex had asked, his eyes scanning the route, committing every turn, every wadi, every potential ambush point to a cold, 3-dimensional map inside his head. 3 primary ones, Marcus replied, tapping the map. First is at the provincial border, run by local militia. A bribe should suffice. We've greased the commander, but the men on the ground will still want their cut. The second is a regular army checkpoint just outside the city of Ras Al Ain. They're lazy, but they can be thorough if their officer is bored. They'll look for contraband, drugs, obvious weapons. Our concealment should hold. The third... Marcus paused, his finger hovering over a narrow, treacherous pass in the mountains. The third is the problem. Serpent's Pass. It's the only viable route to the Jebel Akhdar, and it's controlled by the Mukhabarat, specifically by Colonel Sorin's 4th Directorate. Sorin, Alex had said the name flatly, tasting it like ash. He knew it well. Sorin had personally overseen the interrogation and execution of 2 of the agency's best local assets the year before. He'd had their heads delivered back to their families in crates of pomegranates. It was a message of unforgettable brutality. "He's got intelligence," Marcus had continued, his voice grim. "We don't know how, we don't know from where, but his sources are telling him a significant weapons shipment is coming his way. He's shaking down every camel, every car, every truck that goes through that pass. He has mobile X-ray scanners, the new Chinese ZBVT-3 models. He has dogs trained to sniff out specific chemical compounds in modern explosives, including the nitrocellulose propellant used in the Stinger's launch motor." "So the mission is a bust," Alex had stated, not as a question, but as a conclusion. "No," Marcus said, shaking his head. "The mission is evolving. We've prepared for Sorin." He had then revealed the final, desperate layers of the deception. The grain sacks containing the guidance units were lined with a micro-thin layer of lead polymer foil, just enough to degrade a low-power X-ray scan into a useless, blurry image that could be dismissed as sensor interference. And for the dogs, a stroke of what Marcus called agricultural espionage. The entire shipment of grain, all 4 trucks worth, had been deliberately contaminated with a specific, rare strain of ergot fungus, Claviceps purpurea. The fungus was harmless to humans in such low concentrations, but it released a complex alkaloid that was molecularly similar to several compounds found in nitrocellulose. To a dog's hypersensitive nose, the entire convoy would smell faintly of explosives, creating an overwhelming sensory overload that would mask the real, concentrated scent from the payload truck. The dog would either signal on everything or nothing, rendering its primary function useless. "It's a gamble, Alex," Marcus had concluded, his eyes meeting Alex's across the table. "You'll be the final countermeasure. You're riding as the WFI field coordinator. Your name is Alan Keene, Canadian. Your papers are immaculate. Your cover story is that you're overseeing the emergency grain delivery to famine-struck villages in the Highlands. You speak the language. You know the customs. Your job is to manage the drivers, manage the checkpoints, and if Soren gets too close, you manage him." "And how do I manage Colonel Soren?" Marcus had slid a small, innocuous-looking fountain pen across the table. It was a matte black Lamy Safari, a common, inexpensive model. "This isn't for writing. The cap contains a single, pressure-injected dose of galicyanin B. It's a fast-acting neurotoxin, odorless, colorless. A simple accident, a jab in the arm, a prick on the hand during a tense handshake. He'll be dead in 20 seconds. It will present as a massive coronary event. The mission comes first, Alex. The payload cannot fall into his hands. If you have to burn your cover and use that, the contingency is for the other 3 trucks to scatter while you create a diversion. We lose you, but the mission might survive." Alex's hand drifted now, in the truck's sweltering cab, to the breast pocket of his khaki shirt where that same pen was clipped. A last resort. A suicide pill for the mission itself. The sun was beginning its slow, majestic descent, painting the western sky in violent hues of orange and bruised purple. They were approaching the first checkpoint, a ramshackle collection of sandbags, oil drums, and concertina wire manned by a dozen bored-looking militiamen in mismatched fatigues. A faded pre-war flag of Zarathos hung limply from a crooked pole, a ghost of a forgotten peace. As they slowed, a young man with a wispy beard and an ancient wood-stocked AKM slung over his shoulder swaggered out to meet them. Alex climbed down from the cab, the heat radiating from the asphalt hitting him like a physical blow. He composed his features into a weary, benevolent smile, the kind he'd practiced for hours in front of a mirror until it felt like a second skin. He was no longer Alex Kincaid, SAD operator. He was Alan Keene, a tired but dedicated aid worker from a Canadian NGO, subcontracted by the World Food Initiative. "Peace be with you," Alex said in flawless, locally accented Arabic. "We have a convoy of grain for the villages in the mountains. We have the proper transit papers from the governor's office." The young militiaman looked him up and down, his eyes lingering on Alex's clean boots and sturdy Luminox watch. "Papers can be bought. The road is dangerous. My men and I provide security. Security has a price." This was the easy part. It was the easy. The transactional corruption that oiled the gears of every failed state on the planet. Alex didn't haggle. Haggling would imply he had something to hide. He produced a sealed envelope from his pocket. Inside were 500 pristine US dollars. Not enough to raise suspicion, but more than enough to make the man feel important and respected. The militiaman's eyes lit up. He took the envelope, expertly felt its thickness between thumb and forefinger, and his entire demeanor changed. Of course. The work you do is a blessing from God. Please, proceed." May your journey be safe." He waved them through without so much as a glance into the back of the trucks. One down, two to go. Alex climbed back into the cab, the fake smile vanishing from his face as if it had never been. Farhad let out a long, shuddering breath he seemed to have been holding for miles. "That was easy," Farhad whispered, his voice hoarse. "That was the welcome mat." Alex replied, his gaze already fixed on the dark, jagged line of mountains rising in the distance. "The real door is still ahead of us." They drove for another 3 hours as twilight bled into a deep, star-strewn darkness. The landscape grew more rugged, the road deteriorating into a pockmarked ribbon of asphalt that clung precariously to the side of rising cliffs. The second checkpoint, the one manned by the regular Zarathian army, was exactly as Marcus had predicted, situated just before a crumbling concrete bridge over a dry riverbed. It was manned by soldiers who were listless and sweaty in the fading light. Their officer, a portly captain with a magnificent, drooping mustache, seemed more interested in complaining about the heat, the flies, and the poor quality of his rations than in conducting a thorough search. He demanded they open the back of one of the trucks, the second one in the line, a clean vehicle, as Alex had anticipated. The soldiers climbed in, prodded a few sacks of grain with their bayonets, creating small trickles of white dust, and quickly grew bored. The captain accepted a carton of Marlboro cigarettes, a small luxury in this desolate place, with a grateful nod. He tapped one out, lit it, and inhaled deeply, the smoke mingling with the scent of diesel and dust. He waved them on their way with a lazy flick of his hand. Alex allowed himself a brief, fleeting moment of relief. The plan was holding. The layers of deception were working. They were now less than 50 miles from Serpent's Pass. The sun had long set, plunging the desert into a sudden, profound darkness. Alex had Farhad switch to low beams. The last thing he wanted was to advertise their approach. He checked the sat phone again. One new message, a tiny packet of data that had traveled from Virginia to a satellite in low Earth orbit and back down to his hand in seconds. It contained only a single character string, S4-active-SP-S4, Soren's 4th Directorate, active, Serpent's Pass. Marcus was confirming his deepest fears. Soren wasn't just at the pass, he was active. He was waiting for them. The air in the cab grew thick with unspoken tension. Farhad, despite not knowing the specifics, could feel the palpable shift in Alex. He could feel the gravity of the approaching confrontation. He drove with a rigid, hunched posture, his eyes wide in the faint green glow of the dashboard lights. "My wife," Farhad said suddenly, his voice barely a whisper, a crack in the engine's drone. "Her name is Layla. She told me not to do this. She said the resistance is a lost cause, a dream of old men. That we should flee, try to get to the camps in Turkey." Alex remained silent for a moment, listening to the hum of the tires on the broken asphalt. He wasn't a counselor. He didn't deal in hope. He dealt in outcomes. But he needed Farhad to hold himself together for just a few more hours. "The gunships that bomb your city, Farhad," Alex said, his voice level, devoid of sympathy, but full of cold logic. "The ones that drop barrel bombs on schools and hospitals. They fly low and slow. They feel invincible because nothing can touch them. What we are carrying, it will change that. It will give your people a chance to fight back, to control their own skies. Layla might not have to flee to a refugee camp if men like you are willing to do this." He was using Farhad's family, his love, his fear, twisting it into a motivator. It was a cold, calculated piece of psychological manipulation, and Alex felt a familiar sliver of self-loathing. but it worked. He saw Farhad's jaw tighten, his grip on the wheel firming with a new, grim resolve. The road began to climb in earnest, winding into the foothills of the Jebel Akhdar. The temperature dropped noticeably as they gained altitude. The switchbacks were tight, forcing Farhad to slow the heavy truck to a crawl, its gearbox whining in protest. And then they saw it. A string of harsh, brilliant halogen lights cutting through the darkness, illuminating a formidable roadblock stretched across the narrowest point of the pass. Serpent's Pass. It was more than a checkpoint. It was a fortress. Prefabricated concrete barriers channeled the road into a single, narrow lane. 2 DSK heavy machine guns were positioned in sandbagged emplacements on either side, their long barrels pointing directly at the kill zone. A dozen soldiers in the crisp, black uniforms of the Mukhabarat moved with a disciplined efficiency that made the regular army troops look like children playing soldier. And standing in the center of the illuminated area, a tall, thin man in a perfectly tailored officer's uniform was Colonel Sorin. Even from 100 yards away, he radiated an aura of predatory intelligence. He stood with his hands clasped behind his back, watching their approach not with the bored indifference of the other soldiers, but with the focused, unblinking intensity of a scientist observing a specimen under a microscope. "Radio silence," Alex ordered into the visor mic, his voice a low hiss. "No one talks, no one moves unless I say so. Follow my lead." He took a deep, controlled breath, consciously slowing his heart rate, pushing down the surge of adrenaline. He was Alan Keene again, the tired, slightly frustrated aid worker. He climbed out of the truck, his movements deliberately slow and non-threatening, and walked into the glare of the lights toward the colonel. "Good evening, Colonel," Alex said in Arabic, offering a polite nod. "I am Alan Keene with the World Food Initiative. We have a shipment of grain for the mountain villages, a gift from the international community to the people of Zarathos." Sorin did not smile. His eyes, dark and piercing, scanned Alex's face, searching for any flicker of deceit. "The international community is so generous," Sorin said, his voice a smooth, cultured baritone laced with unconcealed sarcasm. "And yet, so often, its generosity is a mask for other, less noble activities. You are a long way from home, Mr. Keene." "Hunger knows no borders, Colonel. Nor does espionage," Sorin countered. He took a step closer, invading Alex's personal space. "My government has received intelligence. A shipment of advanced weaponry, intended for the terrorists hiding in these mountains, is attempting to pass through this sector, disguised, perhaps, as something innocent, like a shipment of grain." The chess match had begun. Alex forced a look of weary exasperation onto his face. "Colonel, I can assure you, these trucks contain nothing but grain. We are a neutral humanitarian organization. We have been inspected twice already by your army, and they found nothing amiss. The army is full of sentimental fools and corruptible children," Sorin sneered. "I, on the other hand, am a realist. We will inspect your trucks, Mr. Keene, thoroughly. My men will unload every single sack. And if we find nothing, you can be on your way. But if we find what I am looking for..." He let the threat hang in the cold mountain air, more chilling than any weapon. This was the moment Alex had planned for. A full unloading was out of the question. It would take hours. It would expose the specially marked sacks. It was an unacceptable risk. "Colonel, with all due respect, that is not possible," Alex said, his tone firm but still respectful. "This grain is on a strict delivery schedule. There are people, women, and children who have not eaten in days. To unload and reload this entire convoy will take all night. People will die because of this delay. It would be a violation of our international mandate and a significant stain on the honor of your government. He was playing the humanitarian card, appealing to a sense of international propriety that he knew Soren didn't possess. But it was about creating a pretext, about leading the conversation. Soren laughed, a dry, humorless sound that echoed off the rocks. Your concern for our honor is touching, but my concern is for the security of the state. The unloading will begin. He turned and gestured to his men. There is another way, Alex said quickly, raising his voice just enough to make Soren pause. The colonel turned back, a single curious eyebrow raised. I understand your security concerns completely, Alex continued, changing his tack. You have new technology, do you not? Mobile scanners? Surely a scan would be much faster, much more efficient. It would allow you to verify my cargo without condemning innocent people to starvation through a needless delay. He was deliberately walking into the trap, suggesting the very thing he was supposed to fear most. It was a calculated risk, based on a deep psychological profile of Soren that Langley's analysts had compiled. Soren was arrogant. He prided himself on his intellect and his modern methods. He would relish the chance to prove Alex a fool with his own superior technology. A slow, wolfish smile spread across Soren's face. An excellent suggestion, Mr. Keene. You see, we can cooperate after all. Bring the scanner forward, he commanded. A small truck with a large articulated arm detached itself from the shadows. This was it. The Chinese-made ZBVT-3 mobile X-ray system, the 3.7% nightmare made manifest. Soren's men directed Farhad to drive the lead truck, the payload truck, slowly under the scanner's arm. Alex's heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat beneath his calm exterior. He walked alongside the truck, positioning himself near the cab, his right hand casually in his trouser pocket, his fingers wrapped around a small, smooth metal cylinder. It looked like a high-end cigar lighter. It was, in fact, a single-pulse, localized electromagnetic field generator, codenamed Staccato. Its range was pitiful, less than 2 meters. But if timed perfectly, it could overwhelm the scanner's delicate sensors with a targeted blast of electromagnetic noise just as it passed over the most critical parts of the truck's chassis and fuel tanks. The timing had to be perfect. Too early, and Soren would see the interference on his screen and know something was wrong. Too late, and the scanner would get a clear, damning image of the missile tubes hidden in the frame. Inside a nearby command van, Soren was watching a monitor that displayed the X-ray image in real time. Alex could see his silhouette through the van's tinted window. The scanner arm began its slow, humming pass over the truck, starting from the front bumper. Alex watched the arm's progress, his senses screaming, every nerve fiber alight. The chassis rails, the engine block, now the cab. Farhad was a statue inside, staring straight ahead. The arm was moving toward the spot just behind the cab, where the fake fuel tanks and the forwardmost chassis crossmembers containing the stinger tubes were located. Now, Alex squeezed the device in his pocket. There was no sound, no flash, nothing to give it away. But for a fraction of a second, an invisible wave of energy pulsed outward. Inside the van, the crisp, black and white image on Soren's monitor would have dissolved into a brief, violent blizzard of electronic snow, a burst of static before resolving itself again. A common occurrence with mobile scanners in a mountainous area full of mineral deposits. A glitch. Annoying, but insignificant to the untrained eye. The scanner continued its pass over the cargo bed. The lead-lined sacks did their job, showing up as indistinct, blurry patches amidst the clear, granular image of the loose grain. Another glitch, as the arm passed over the rear axles, where more components were hidden. Alex pulsed the device a second time. From the outside, nothing had happened. The truck rolled forward, and the scan was complete. Alex held his breath, forcing his expression to remain placid. He saw an officer emerge from the van and whisper something to Soren. Soren's expression was unreadable. He strode over to Alex, his polished boots crunching on the gravel. "There appears to be some magnetic interference from the minerals in these mountains," Soren said. His eyes narrowed, searching Alex's face for any tell. "The scan is not perfectly clear, but it shows grain, tons of it." Alex allowed himself a small, tired smile. "As I told you, Colonel." But it wasn't over. Soren was too good, too paranoid, to give up that easily. "There is one final test," he announced. "Bring the dog." A handler appeared, leading a large, handsome German shepherd on a short leash. The dog was whining with excitement, its tail wagging, eager to work. This was the second layer of the trap, the ergot fungus, the agricultural espionage. The handler led the dog around the truck. As it approached the cargo bed, its demeanor changed. It began to sniff the air, its nose twitching frantically. It whined, confused. It smelled propellant everywhere, a faint, ghost-like scent emanating from every single sack of grain. It was a sensory overload, a puzzle it couldn't solve. The dog circled the truck twice, then sat down and looked up at its handler with a bewildered expression. It had no single concentrated source to signal on. The handler looked embarrassed. "Colonel, I don't understand. He seems confused. The air, the wind, perhaps the scent is dispersed. He cannot isolate a source." Soren stared at the dog, then at the truck, then back at Alex, for a long, terrifying moment that stretched into an eternity. Alex was certain Soren would see through the ruse, that his professional paranoia would win out over the evidence of his own sophisticated tools. He could feel the weight of the Lamy Safari fountain pen in his breast pocket. His hand started to drift towards it. Then Soren sighed, a sound of profound, intellectual frustration. He had been so certain. His intelligence had been ironclad. But the evidence of his own eyes, his own technology, and his own prized dog contradicted it. He was a man who believed in data, and the data was telling him he was wrong. "It seems you are just a simple aid worker after all, Mr. Keene," Soren said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "You may proceed. But be warned, these mountains are full of terrorists. I cannot guarantee your safety." "We place our faith in a higher power, Colonel," Alex said, the lie coming easily to his lips. He nodded to Farhad. The truck's engine rumbled back to life. Slowly, agonizingly, the convoy began to move through the checkpoint and into the darkness of the pass beyond. Alex didn't look back. He knew Soren would be watching them, his brilliant mind still churning, second-guessing, replaying every moment. They were through. They had survived Serpent's Pass. The relief was so profound, it was physically sickening. Farhad was shaking, mumbling a quiet prayer of thanks. Even Alex felt a tremor in his own hands as the adrenaline began to recede. He sent a 2-character burst transmission, PC, pass clear. The rendezvous point was a small, abandoned quarry 10 miles beyond the pass. The instructions were precise. Park the trucks in a U-shape. Kill the lights. Wait for a signal. They arrived half an hour later. The quarry was an eerie bowl of shadow under a sky dusted with a billion cold stars. The 4 drivers cut their engines, and a profound silence descended, broken only by the chirping of crickets and the frantic beating of their own hearts. They waited. 5 minutes. 10. Alex scanned the quarry rim with his naked eye, his night vision fully adjusted. Nothing. A cold knot of unease began to form in his stomach. The rebels were supposed to be here. They were known for their punctuality. Then his sat phone buzzed, not with a message, but with a live audio link from Marcus. That was not part of the plan. Live links were a last resort, a break glass in case of emergency measure. Kincaid. Marcus's voice hissed in his ear, the audio thin and strained with satellite delay. Abort? Repeat, abort the handover. Soren's not done. He played you. What are you talking about, Marcus? We're clear. We passed. Negative. The probe, the checkpoint, it was all a charade. He let you through. He tagged you. One of his men must have slapped a magnetic GPS tracker on your chassis while you were focused on the scanner. We have 2 Hind gunships lifting off from the Ras Al Ain Air Base. They're not on a routine patrol. Their flight path is a direct intercept for your position. ETA 8 minutes. The blood drained from Alex's face, leaving it cold and numb. Soren hadn't been defeated. He'd been patient. He'd let the prey escape the trap so he could follow it back to its lair. He wasn't just after the weapons. He was after the rebels who were coming to collect them. A decapitation strike. The rebels? Alex demanded. They're 5 mics out, moving into the quarry from the North Ridge. They're walking right into a kill box, Marcus said, his voice tight with urgency. You have to warn them. Get the payload and get out of there. Alex was already moving. Farhad, get out. Everyone out of the trucks now, he yelled, jumping from the cab. He pulled a small, powerful flashlight from his belt and pointed it at the North Ridge, flashing a rapid, frantic sequence. ... .. SOS. The universal signal of distress, one he knew the FZA commander would recognize. He saw movement on the ridge. The rebels had seen his signal. They were stopping, but it was too late. From the south, he heard it. The terrifying, distinctive thwump-thwump-thwump of Hind attack helicopter rotors, a sound that had haunted the dreams of the rebellion for years. 2 pairs of navigation lights appeared over the ridge, growing larger at an alarming speed. They're here, one of the drivers screamed, scrambling for cover behind a large boulder. The quarry erupted into a maelstrom of sound and fury. The first Hind swooped low, its nose-mounted Yak-B 12.7mm cannon spitting a torrent of tracer fire that chewed up the ground around the trucks with a deafening roar. The second helicopter circled high, a predator surveying the scene, directing the slaughter. Alex grabbed Farhad and dragged him behind the solid engine block of the lead truck. We have to get the cargo, he roared over the din. It's our only chance. He knew what he had to do. The mission had changed in an instant. It was no longer about delivery. It was about survival. And the only tool that could ensure their survival was currently buried inside the truck's very frame. Under the withering fire, he directed the other drivers and the handful of rebels who had scrambled down from the ridge. The fuel tank, the one on the driver's side, get it open. There are release latches inside. While they fumbled with the tank, Alex slid under the truck's chassis. He found the disguised release bolt he'd memorized from the schematics. Using a specialized wrench from his go bag, he cranked it open. With a heavy groan, a section of the steel crossmember swung down, revealing the dull green tube of a Stinger launcher. He pulled it out. It was heavy, dense, real. A rebel fighter, a young man with terrified eyes but steady hands, helped him pull a second one free. From the now open fuel tank, Farhad was pulling out the components. A battery coolant unit, a grip stock. They were working in a frenzy, illuminated by the hellish strobe of cannon fire. The air was thick with the smell of cordite, hot metal, and spilled diesel fuel. How do we use them? The young rebel shouted. Alex didn't have time for a full lesson. He snapped the components together with the practiced, brutal efficiency of a man who had done it 100 times before in training. BCU in, gripstock on, uncap the seeker head. Shoulder it, he commanded the rebel. Point it at the helicopter. When you hear the tone in your ear change, pull the trigger. The first hind was making another pass, its cannon ripping one of the decoy trucks to shreds, the grain exploding from it like dusty confetti. Alex shouldered his own launcher. He flipped up the sight and acquired the target. The infrared seeker in the missile's nose began to search for the heat signature of the hind's engines. A low growl filled his ear. He waited for it to lock on, to distinguish the engine from the surrounding heat. The growl sharpened into a high-pitched, steady squeal. Lock on. Fire, he yelled. He pulled the trigger. There was a violent kick against his shoulder and a deafening roar as the launch motor fired, ejecting the missile from the tube. A split second later, the main rocket motor ignited with a brilliant flash, and the Stinger shot into the night sky, a fiery javelin trailing a plume of white smoke. He saw the young rebel beside him fire his own missile a moment later. Two streaks of fire corkscrewed toward the heavens.